Hasan Piker.
And I have with me today Woke Bae. BuzzFeed call him Woke Bae.
My favorite simple-minded streamer once said something about Adolf Hitler, which I think encapsulates the deeply stupid way that we, as Americans, tend to think about Nazism.
Oh shit. And Hitler invaded countries based on Germanic ties at first? Yeah, dude. Talk to me when he's throwing Ukrainians in a what are you talking about? Talk to me when he's throwing Ukrainians in a concentration camp, okay? Hitler wasn't bad because he decided to invade Austria. He was bad because he was killing Jews, okay? That was the problem. He wasn't like, oh yeah, we're gonna annex territory with like Germanic people in it. That wasn't the main problem with Hitler, I think.
Now, I think this statement demonstrates the primary problem that so many Americans tend to have when we think about Nazism, confusing the most heinous crime of Nazism with its primary or only crime. Before going further, I should clarify that I have no beef with Hasan about this. I'm taking his quote out of its proper context, and I don't even doubt that he clarified his thoughts subsequently. I'm just not a big enough nerd to watch his streams in full. Therefore, we should interpret the intention of his comments with the utmost surety. I am not quite assessing Hasan's intentions as much as the problematic statements which, intentionally or not, his statements seem to evoke. To me, it seems perfectly logical that we put such focus on the Holocaust when discussing the crimes of Nazism. As Joseph Stalin once said, "One dish is its tragedy, a million dish is its deceit." Our brains can't really comprehend the scale of the sorrow and horror which Nazism inflicted on so many. However, when we see the horror of Nazism laid bare before us in, say, a serving Auschwitz prisoner, we can't help but, at least somewhat, feel sorrow for the victims of Nazism. This gives gravity to the statistics about the Holocaust. You just imagine that sorrow you feel multiplied by millions and feel distraught at the very idea. This is all fine, that's just how human empathy works. The problem comes when you fail to realize theological processes taking place. As an aside, I think that this partially explains why some people don't feel as much empathy for the victims of Soviet atrocities as they do for victims of Nazi atrocities. Most people aren't going to want to go through the arduous task of reading the works of Solzhenitsyn or Grossman, and we don't have a treasure trove of images to show. So in the recognition of the extreme horror of Soviet atrocities, often escaped a warm heart and cold heart alike. Back to the subject of Nazism and Hasan's ignorance. If, let's say, a Polish person were to hear Hasan say this and shove a sheave in his gut, this would be a more or less understandable reaction to the gross inhumanity at display. I'm not your history teacher, so I don't get to go into the countless atrocities of the Nazi regime and their occupation of the majority of Europe. If you aren't ignorant as Hasan seems, just as of Nazi war crimes, Nazi atrocities, or the crimes of Nazi occupation. And that's sure to keep you occupied for a few weeks. I'll use some sources in the description to get you started. However, beyond its mere inhumanity, this comment is also ignorant for another reason. He completely misunderstands the function of an analogy. If I use an analogy, Vladimir Putin is like Adolf Hitler. I am inherently acknowledging these are distinct individuals and situations. That's the function of the word like. Unless you're a complete idiot, you should understand that what I'm trying to say is that there are key similarities between Vladimir Putin and Adolf Hitler. Even though they're obviously their own people. What are some of these similarities? Well, they both brutally invaded a recently free republic, breaking over 20 years of peace in Europe. They both practiced the tools of inhumanity in a country experiencing civil war before using them in the conflict for which they are most associated. They are both authoritarians who have a very tenuous claim to representing the will of the people. Until they embarked on their invasion, they had already stolen quite a bit of land, and the European powers were okay with this. They can both be called revanchist reactionaries. They are both quite clearly very anti-Semitic.
У меня много друзей, евреев с детства. Они говорят, Зеленский не еврей. Это позор еврейского народа. Это не шутка, не ирония, понимаете?
In the course of human events, we often find it necessary to loosen the bonds of limited personal perspective and expand on our feelings by the use of analogy. This tool, so often utilized in literature, is very simple in concept. But that doesn't stop it from deeply confusing Redditors such as Hasan Piker. All that one does is connect two different things within the mind using a word such as like. For instance, perhaps I do not know about the politics of Canada. However, I do know about the politics of America. In such a case, it might be helpful if a Canadian were to say to me, oh, the Liberals are kind of like the Democrats. This would help me to connect my idea of the Democratic Party in America with the Liberal Party in Canada. This is actually a very good example because these parties are not the same in many respects. They exist in different contexts, and therefore they have a different set of policy proposals to address those contexts. I'm sure that there are probably some people right now hearing this and getting fucking infuriated. No, the Liberal Party is centrist, but the American Democratic Party is right-wing. For a variety of reasons, don't be like this type of person. Understanding the Liberals by analogy to the Democrats might be extremely helpful to me as an isolated American trying to understand the rest of the world. I should definitely keep in mind that similarity does not indicate that those things are identical. However, that's kind of implicitly acknowledged when we use the word like, and those who get incredibly angry about the usage of analogy should really fucking read a book.
I know that analogies to Nazism are quite overplayed, so I understand why it seems stupid when you are presented with one. However, when misunderstand the purpose of the analogy, the person making the analogy wants you to understand what they already do. In this case, that Vladimir Putin is evil and must be opposed. So they are analogizing to a piece of common knowledge. Hitler was evil and had to be opposed. In order to get you to understand this very fucking obvious truth. Again, very fucking obviously, Vladimir Putin is not the exact same as Adolf Hitler, and his actions are also not the exact same. But there are very clear similarities uniting these pieces of shit. As Jordan Maxwell Peterson suggested, if you, unlike Hasan, read a fucking book for once, maybe you would understand this. Hey, I also have a video essay diving a bit deeper into the subject of empathy and analogy, which you might enjoy if you got any enjoyment out of this video. Godspeed, gamers.